Hello there, welcome to my review of the 1998 film Lost in Space, starring William Hurt as John Robinson, Mimi Rogers as Maureen Robinson, Heather Graham as Judy Robinson, Matt LeBlanc as Major Don West, and Gary Oldman as Dr. Smith. It was directed by Stephen Hopkins, whose previous directorial efforts include Predator 2 and A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, and was written by Akiva Goldsman, writer of such films as Batman and Robin, The Dark Tower, and the story for Transformers 5, The Last Night. So, to the spoiler-free review. Why? Why does this film exist? Why did I put myself through watching it again, twice, in a row? Why is Akiva Goldsman allowed to write blockbuster movies when it's clearly a skill he does not have? Well, I like to think I've done this as a public service. I watched it so you don't have to. And I urge you not to. I plead with you not to. As I imagine the cast of the film probably do too. It's bad, and there is nothing even slightly redeemable about it. The plot is dull and makes no sense, serves no purpose, and is about nothing. The dialogue is awful. No one says anything that remotely approaches clever, or witty, or interesting, or informative. The special effects are poor and overused. The direction is lackluster and functional, in the sense that the camera is pointed in the right direction. The sets look cheap and identikit and just odd. The action scenes are pointless. The lighting is too dark and too flat. I honestly can't think of one thing that is even slightly good in this film. It is definitely, unquestionably, nothing but the absolute worst. If every single copy of this film was somehow destroyed, it would be a benefit to the history of cinema. This film actually made me a bit angry. Anyway, on to the spoilers. If you haven't seen the film, well done. Keep watching if you want to know why you made the absolute correct choice. I never saw the original 60s TV series this film is based on, so I knew very little about the concept before going in the first time I saw it. If I had been a fan of the series, I might be even more offended by how bad this is. We begin in space with a narration from William Hurt's John Robinson, who explains how the Earth's resources are running out, and the best hope is to go to space and find another planet, as we've ruined ours. To do this, humanity has united together and we have stopped having wars. Oh, and that mutant terrorists are at war with us. Except not all of them are mutants. LeBlanc's West is in space with his pal fighting some terrorists who are also up there. He saves his pal because he's such a good pilot and such a good friend, but doesn't know how to speak like a human being.
Okay, last one to kill a bad guy buys the beer.
And so only communicates to the audience in action hero quips that don't sound at all cool and don't really make any sense.
Never liked that station anyway.
He quips that the mutant terrorists look even uglier up close, despite not being able to see them. And that's the smartest thing he says in this opening scene. There's no real reason for this opening scene. It's not exciting or particularly creative. It introduces a character we will be reintroduced to a few scenes later. It certainly doesn't further the plot, and it doesn't tie into anything in any other part of the film. It feels like there's a lot cut from this film, but it's shocking to me that this scene made the cut compared with some of the stuff they must have cut out. We get more exposition from a news report saying that the whole Robinson family is going into space. Then we are slowly introduced to the rest of the family. Will, the son and youngest in the family, is in trouble at school because he's a genius, but acts up because his father is never around. Both of these facts are repeated throughout the film by virtually every single character in the film.
Will is terribly gifted. Wasn't there some way his father could have attended the science fair?
Dad says don't bring them. Like anything I do matters to him.
You know, you're off saving humanity, so what does it matter that Will has to black out of school just to get his father's attention? Will was looking for you.
Yeah. Send him back to his room.
We then get to meet the dad, John, at a press conference explaining some more of the plot. They are building a space gate near Earth. The Robinsons will travel to the nearest habitable planet, many light years away, in stasis, to supervise the building of another space gate, so that everyone else can travel through these two space gates through hyperspace instantly, because apparently you can't travel through hyperspace without the gates because most of space is unmapped. So if you try to use hyperspace without the gates, you will get lost in space. The entire first act of this film is quickly introducing the characters and slowly introducing this plot element, which has absolutely no bearing on the rest of the film. This is purely the device to get them lost, but it takes up just so much of the film. Doesn't really make sense. I can understand why the whole family is going. If they stayed, the kids would be the same age as the parents by the time the parents are able to return. Fine. But they're the only ones going on the mission. The whole purpose of the mission is to build a hypergate hundreds of light years away. But they aren't taking any architects or engineers or construction workers with them. They're going all that way, only have to wait at the other end for the people who are actually capable of building the thing. They're only taking one robot, not a whole fleet of robots, just one. Also, they aren't travelling at light speed or hyperspeed or whatever they call it for the aforementioned reasons, and it makes it clear that Earth will have completely run out of resources within the next 30 years.
In 2 decades, the Earth will be unable to support human life.
Which means that they wouldn't even make it out of our galaxy by the time Earth is completely empty of natural resources. The terrorists want to stop them so they can build a rival hypergate and get to the new planet first, so they can leave everyone they don't like behind. Why? Why does that make any sense? All of this is completely unnecessary and overly complicated, especially as the film ends with them still being lost in space, thus dooming Earth to its inevitable destruction.
In 2 decades, the Earth will be unable to support human life.
All it actually needs to get the story going is for the Robinsons to be going on a mission to explore space. The whole family is going because it will be a long mission. Something goes wrong, they get lost. That's all you need. We next learn that daughter Penny Robinson, the middle child, doesn't want to go. She is 15 or 16 and doesn't want to leave her friends. Something that isn't explored any further, as her character remains completely underdeveloped for the rest of the film and barely speaks or interacts with the rest of the family. Certainly not for very long. She's been getting into trouble because her father is never there,
That Penny's been dragged home by security 3 nights in a row.
and so on her last night of freedom she sneaks out via a ladder she keeps in a transparent plastic bag. For a world low on resources, they keep a lot of unnecessary items wrapped in plastic. There's another reminder that Will is a genius and that his father is never there. Then we find out that the captain of their spaceship was assassinated by the terrorists, so Major West is ordered to replace him, giving us our second introduction to Major West. We find out Dr. Smith, who works with John, gave the terrorists the old captain's address, and their plan was to kill him, assuming that they would never be able to find another pilot in time for their mission. So these terrorists are clearly not smart. Dr. Smith isn't that smart either, because he hasn't been paid by them yet, and they tell him he won't get paid unless he sabotages their spaceship personally, which he immediately agrees to do. Again, all that unnecessary. Just have him be paid to sabotage the ship. We then meet eldest Robinson child daughter Judy, who is a medical doctor and a scientist who works with Dr. Smith. West is attracted to her but doesn't know she's a Robinson, so makes a sexually inappropriate comment to her father right before he finds out.
That's one cold fish I'd love to thaw.
Which is just cringeworthy. We then get another scene of Maureen telling the dad that he's never there and that the son is a genius, this time because he's built a model of a theoretical time machine. I wonder if that'll come into play later on in the film. Dr. Smith sabotages the ship, but for some reason the terrorists decide to electrocute him while he's still on board the ship, rather than pay him, or just kill him later. Which means he wakes up just as the robot that he reprogrammed is sabotaging the ship. Gives him a chance to wake up the family from stasis, and they then stop the robot. This scene makes sense, up until the point where they have flown towards the sun in the 16 hours they've been in space, the sun being quite far away. So they have to engage the hyperdrive to fly through the middle of the sun, which finally gets them lost in space. While this is happening, Judy hasn't revived, and Dr. Smith is the only one who can save her, which is lucky for him, as they've already discovered that he's the saboteur. They get her to the sick bay, and we get a futuristic 3D rendering of her body by the computer to show it's a sci-fi film, which includes her boobs, something this film is a little too obsessed with. The stasis suits the characters wear all have clearly defined boobs, and not just the women. The men's suits all have huge pecs built into them. The kids too. It's pretty weird to see the two youngest kids wearing costumes that accentuate their chests so obviously. I don't know who was responsible for this choice, but it's not the first time a film written by Akiva Goldsman has featured unnecessary anatomical details to a exoskeleton. So they finally got lost in space, and as they're exploring this uncharted area, they see another ship. But there's an anomaly in their way, and like all good scientists, they fly straight into it without much discussion. The ship is from Earth and has an alien ship attached to it, but when they go on board, it's completely empty. They find a recording of West's pal from Earth, but he's older now and is a major, and all the tech on the ship, including their robots, are much more advanced. But it takes a long time before they work out they have gone into the future. There's absolutely no need for this to be the case. It could have just been an alien ship. I mean, it sort of sets up the third act, but not in any way that matters. No time to worry about that though, as they find a friendly, poorly rendered CGI alien monkey and then get attacked by space spiders. These two things are completely unrelated. They escape, but they have to leave their robot behind, and on their way out, Dr. Smith gets scratched by one of the space spiders. The spiders follow them through space onto their ship. The Robinsons manage to get rid of them, but crash onto a nearby planet in the explosion West uses to kill the spiders. This entire midsection seems to only be so that Dr. Smith gets injured by the space spiders in order to set up the dumb finale. There's absolutely no other reason for it. The space monkey could have been found on the planet they crash on. And there's absolutely no information introduced other than potentially the time travel anomaly, which is reintroduced on the planet they land on anyway. This film is like listening to someone tell a really boring story. We learn absolutely nothing about the characters or their relationships to each other. The only thing we do learn is that the dad is never around. Again and again and again. I know nothing about Judy or Penny or the mother Maureen, and the only thing we know about John and Will is that Will is probably a big fan of Cats in the Cradle. So another anomaly appears on the planet, and John works out it's a time bubble. But it has the fuel they need to get off the planet, because they don't have enough fuel left. I don't know how much fuel they would need to travel as far as they were planning to go, but it seems like it would have been more than what they've used so far. Anyway, he decides that he and West should explore alone this time, despite the entire reason for taking Smith with them to the abandoned ship previously was because they didn't trust to leave him on his own. As they are exploring this time bubble, they get knocked out by the very robot that Will has just started rebuilding back on the ship. Back on the ship, Smith convinces Will to sneak out with him so they can help his dad. The kid is so starved for attention and a father figure, he naturally doesn't take much convincing. Turns out it was future Will's robot who knocked them out, for no reason, as they could have just found him on their own. He's built a time machine to go back and stop them from ever going on the mission in the first place. Smith and Will turn up, Smith having stolen Will's gun from him. Young child Will has his own gun, but that's hardly surprising as the ship is filled with weapons hidden in little cupboards all over the ship. Smith demands to use the time machine to save himself, but luckily for Old Will is being protected by future Smith, who has become a giant spider. He knocks out his past human self and sends West, John and Child Will away to be guarded by the robot. He then reveals to Old Will that he's the one that killed all the women and is planning to use the time machine to go back and colonize Earth with the spider babies he now has. We're going to have to assume that these spiders can self-impregnate and not think about that any further. Child Will has convinced the robot to let them go, so West takes Smith and Child Will back to the ship while John faces off against Spider Smith, armed with a particularly sharp science trophy that belongs to young Will. I mean, if it were me, I'd have probably asked the trained soldier to fight the big spider, maybe armed with one of the other weapons lying around. But this is about rebuilding a relationship with a future version of a son he doesn't know, rather than saving his present son. He quickly beats Spider-Smith in a really simple but highly telegraphed way, introduced earlier in the film, and manages to save old Will. But the ship has to take off without them, but then gets hit by a big rock and explodes because the planet is being destroyed by the time machine. Luckily, they have a time machine. So Will lets John go back in time a few minutes to get on board the ship, and they escape by flying through the middle of the planet as it breaks up, because John Robinson guesses that this will be safer than taking off. Unfortunately, they are caught in the gravitational pull of the destroyed planet and have to use the hyperdrive again, hoping that this time it won't leave them lost in space. By this point, they seem to have forgotten their mission was to save Earth, and that Smil will murder them the first chance he gets. It's not entirely clear if they are also in the future at this point, or how they will get anywhere having so little fuel left when they come out of hyperspace, which is apparently powered by a different fuel source, I guess. I still know nothing about any of them, other than maybe John will be a slightly more attentive father to Will now. I guess Penny is on her own, and it's too late for Judy. The women have had nothing to do in this film, nothing at all, and have very little character because of it. I understand the first two acts are based on the first few episodes of the original series, with the third act being entirely new, but it just doesn't connect very well, and those first two acts just feel like filler, with a tiny amount of setup, and the third act is just really bad. I really can't understand why Akiva Goldsman is allowed to write these kinds of films. I wish I could say it's because he's a bad writer, but he's not. He's written some very good screenplays. I mean, A Time to Kill is a great film, with one of the greatest scenes in any film.
Yes, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell!
But he just cannot do big budget action films. This shouldn't have been that tough. Get them lost as soon as possible, have them crash on a planet, have something weird happen while they're there, either caused by or exacerbated by Dr. Smith, following his own agenda, have them resolve it, and attempt to get home. Use the simple story to explore the characters and give them all something interesting to do. The film takes far too long to get lost, and spends far too long in space. And the plot when they finally get to the planet is just so dumb and confusing. This is supposed to be a summer family film, but I can't imagine how they thought it would appeal to anyone. I mean, I can understand how Smith being with them makes it more difficult in a film, whereas in a series it makes sense to have a character who is the constant antagonist. But if you want him in the film, and if you want to do a time travel plot, I wouldn't have had him in the first half of the film. Get the family lost due to an unknown malfunction. While lost, they receive a distress signal from a planet nearby. There they find Dr. Smith on his own. Smith was part of an early exploration mission with his own family, but their death and his solitude have driven him mad, which the Robinsons are unaware of at first. They encounter strange time anomalies on the planet, which Smith claims to know nothing about. Eventually, they discover that he has been working on experimenting with time travel, and was able to use this to sabotage the Robinsons' ship, so they would find him. But he can only send information through time, not any physical objects. The anomalies are getting bigger and slowly destroying the planet, so they have to take him with them and escape. When they are back on the ship, Smith finds out that they don't know how to get back home, and so they are all still lost in space. If Penny is upset by leaving her friends behind, she can perhaps use the time anomalies to see what has become of them, and what will become of them in the future, seeing not just how much she has missed, but how much they respect her for going into space, revealing that throughout the film, piece by piece. Make Judy and West's relationship more realistic. Instead of her hating his personality through the entire film, before making out with him in front of her whole family at the end, make him much less sleazy, but have their loving relationship moments interrupted by constantly being in the presence of her family. Instead of John being distant, make Will more of a loner, which John is worried about until he sees future versions of Will grow into a more rounded person via the time anomalies. Have friction between Maureen and John because she has put her entire career on hold, but have her be the one who knows about time travel and work out what Smith did, so she realizes how crucial she is to the mission. You can even give the space monkey something to do by making it be the only physical thing that is able to travel through time, which is how they're able to stop Smith in the climax. Anything that gives the characters something to do and gives them some kind of story arc. As it is, the three female characters have virtually nothing to do. They aren't even damsels in distress, which might be something. They're just there, and occasionally have a line of dialogue. Will and John are given the start of a story act, but it's never really resolved, certainly not satisfactorily. Smith is villainous in whatever way he needs to be for that particular point in the plot, but really the sabotage which he was sort of forced into is the only part of the plot he actually has any effect on. West might not as well be there at all. It's just all so badly done. I understand the new Netflix series is a much better reinterpretation, and I think a show where the family is lost in space works much better than a film where you know they either have to get unlost by the end or it has to lead into sequels. But even so, this film shouldn't have been that bad. Lost in Space deserves to be lost in history. Thank you. Goodbye.